We are extremely excited to have Cern Basher back because Cern likes to tackle these issues that deal with lots of numbers and technical stuff and digging and researching that answer questions that you probably have out there that I have, that I was unwilling even to go check them out. And one of those questions is what Cern is going to be jumping on today. Hi, Cern. How you doing?
Good morning, Randy. I'm well, thanks.
I
Yeah, how are you?
understand that you might have had a nickel or a dime in video over the last couple of days.
Yeah, a couple of bucks. Couple
Okay,
of bucks.
good. So you're feeling well this morning.
Yes. Yes, not because of that, but yes.
Okay. Because who knows, you might have also had money in Tesla, which last time I checked was down $3 this morning.
Oh well,
Oh
sometimes you
well.
win some, sometimes you lose some.
So it is true that many of us, especially in the Tesla community, look at the future, we look at the way things are going to change, or we look at things that are in the midst of change. And in order to really get our curiosity satisfied about things, it would take a lot of work. And one of those things is something that you've tackled again. You've tackled a number of these kinds of issues. But one of the questions I've had, I know, and I think others have had as well, is what happens to the gas stations? There's a version of that. I don't know if you're going to cover it today, but there's a version of that is when do we reach peak oil? Have we already reached peak oil? Will 5 years from now, will folks be wondering, 5%, 10%, 20% less oil used per day, which might cause some real changes in world economies. But those are all issues that I've thought about and tried to, and I pretty much think I know how to do it. I just haven't been willing to do the work. So anyway, you've done the work. I'm going to give you the screen and let you take it away.
That sounds great. Yeah, I am not afraid to let my spreadsheets go boldly when those spreadsheets have gone before. And in this case, I created what I'm calling the fumes model. And fumes stands for fueling usage and market extinction of service stations. This may sound a bit dramatic, but actually I think this is a pretty apt description for what is about to happen to service stations in the US and around the world.
All right.
So let's dive into this. So by way of background, I'm just going to share a few slides from this RMI report, Rocky Mountain Institute report, titled "The End of the Ice Age." And there's some interesting charts in here, and some of these we've seen before, but I'll just go through them with you. So we all know that different countries around the world are at different stages of EV adoption. And most people are probably aware that Norway is leading the world. Norway now has something close to 90% of all vehicles sold are EVs. It's really quite phenomenal. And not too far behind them are countries like Iceland, Sweden, Denmark. China is catching up fast. And the US is a bit of a laggard in this regard, but it's okay. If you look at the chart on the right, if you actually sort of time shift these uptake curves to align with when they cross the 10% threshold, all the curves actually sit on top of each other pretty nicely.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not really true that Norway is, something different. Norway is certainly a sign of what's to come for pretty much every other auto market in the world, including the United States. Maybe we are a little bit slower for some reasons, but overall, these S curves sit pretty nicely on top of each other.
Isn't it interesting too how these leading countries are these places that it's very, very cold in winter, and everybody seems to have all these issues with regard to EVs and the cold, but apparently these folks are not troubled by it.
No, it is not a problem. Not a problem at all. Yeah, that's one of the many, many things that you hear that is just not true. So the other interesting thing to talk about is, experts make projections about EV sales. And interestingly, they are always wrong. And usually they're constantly revising up their forecasts. And the problem is these outlooks do not follow any kind of S curve. They're just simply straight line projections into the future. And so that's why they constantly need to be updated, because they're not factoring in the exponentials that are at play here. So one of the big exponentials that's at play is the declining cost of batteries. So if you just assume that battery prices, stay where they are or go down by a little bit, then yeah, okay, maybe it's going to be a linear growth in EVs. But battery prices have come down dramatically, and this is actually a fairly short time frame on this chart. If we expand it out, battery costs have dropped something like 90% in the last decade.
Right.
Right. And even from where we are today, we expect significant declines in battery costs. So this is one of the key factors in making EVs cost competitive, driving down the cost of EVs. So what is happening here is, similar to the internet, which was led by the United States and then got pushed to the rest of the world. We're now seeing China essentially lead this and pushing EVs to the rest of the world. Now, certainly Tesla is a part of that with their big production facility in China and so on. But this is something that's coming. It's just going to take a while for it to play out worldwide. And in this case, the US is not at the forefront of this. The US is kind of in the middle of the pack. Okay.
Right. Mhm.
So the EV share of global car sales is going to continue to propagate across the world over time. Now, one of the key things is in terms of EV adoption is getting the sticker price of EVs down to something that's equal to what people are used to paying for vehicles. And that's been the big challenge. It's been the big debate within the Tesla community about whether Tesla should lower prices versus advertise, etc. But the fact remains, over time, the key thing is lower cost of vehicles. Now, this is a chart that shows when certain markets have reached parity on gasoline engine vehicles, internal combustion engines. So, in some places that's already happened, and the projection is it'll happen basically all over the world between now and 2031. Now, again, these are projections. They could be wrong, could be quicker, could be a little longer, but this is coming for every area of the world for whatever size vehicle you want to look at. Okay, so if EVs are on the ascendancy, then ICE vehicles are on the decline. And there's bands around that. It could happen fast or faster. So you've got these sort of colliding S-curves with the rise of one and the decline of the other. So what interests me about this is the for gasoline powered vehicles, they're fueled by gasoline, diesel, etc. And I was curious to see what that looks like and what the impact might be on gas stations. And if you think about the forces at play on this, there's actually two for gas stations. You've got the rise of EVs eating away at one end, and then you've got the efficiency of gasoline-powered vehicles eating away at the other end. Gasoline-powered vehicles over time have become more efficient. There are standards all around the world to continue to drive that. One of the goals is for gasoline-powered vehicles to become 5% more efficient each year.
Yeah.
Right. So the miles per gallon is going up over time, and just that by itself would probably cause a decline in the amount of fuel used. But combine that with the growth of EVs, and you've got a serious challenge. So I wanted to try to model that out a little bit. And so this fumes model is my attempt at doing that. Now, I would say with all projections, illustrations, they're going to be wrong. I'm not suggesting that this model has the timing perfectly. What I'm trying to illustrate here is the trend, not necessarily when precisely things will happen. The reality is we don't know, and there's all kinds of things that could happen along the way to cause a temporary pause.
Right.
Right? For example, when Russia invaded Ukraine, that definitely caused some challenges in the supply chain that disrupted the whole EV market around the world. Okay, so I built two models, one without autonomy and one with autonomy. And as I go through it, I'll compare and contrast the two. Without autonomy, I'm assuming that autonomy never happens, just EV adoption.
Uh-huh.
With autonomy, I'm assuming it starts in 2026. And I'm assuming that the number of miles driven per vehicle per year without autonomy is about 12,500. And with autonomy ramps up from that level to 47,500 between 2026 and 2031.
Okay.
So a ramp, average vehicle is driving more and more miles. I'm
What,
also assuming,
and in your assumption, what percentage of the population do you believe still drives a car uniquely? Just they own their own car and they drive it.
I haven't explicitly built that into the model. I'm more looking at the overall fleet, just the number of
Got it.
vehicles
Okay.
and the average mileage of that fleet.
Okay.
So certainly, in averages, there'll be some people that don't drive a whole lot and other people that drive a lot more. And just looking at sort of the blended average,
Okay. All right.
right? So in one model at 12,500, the other model is 47,500.
Okay.
Okay. Um, I'm also looking at the growth of vehicle sales per year. So without autonomy, I'm assuming it grows 2% per year, kind of in line with inflation or something, just population growth, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming with autonomy, we won't need as many vehicles. So I'm actually assuming a 3% decline in vehicle sales per year.
Per year. Okay.
Okay. And then in both models, I'm assuming that maximum EV adoption is 90%. I'm holding out that there'll be 10% of vehicles out there that are still ICE vehicles for whatever reason. Maybe they're fire trucks, maybe they're police cars, maybe they're whatever. The certain vehicles that just don't get converted to EVs.
And is this, when you're saying adoption, does this mean the resulting fleet, or are you talking about per year?
Both.
Both.
But yes, it's per year it maxes out at 90%, and therefore resulting fleet also maxes out at 90%.
Okay. All right. Mhm.
Okay. That may be a terrible assumption. It probably doesn't matter a whole lot whether that's 90 or 100, but I just put that in there. There are some people that will probably say that there's no way that we're going to convert every single vehicle to electric.
Right.
Okay, I'll give you 10%.
Okay.
Okay. Now, some assumptions that are the same across both models. So the average miles per gallon for the fleet, starting at 20 miles per gallon. And I'm assuming a 3% growth in that fuel consumption or the fuel efficiency per year.
Okay.
Okay. Again, some of the targets have it close to 5%. I'm starting with an initial number of gas stations in the United States of 145,000. There's some differences in these numbers depending on what data source you look at, but I think this is kind of in the ballpark.
Okay.
Okay, that's not the number of pumps, that's the number of gas stations or gas station locations. And the average gas station sells about 1.2 million gallons of fuel a year. That's about 3,500 gallons a day. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the current fleet of vehicles in the US about 290 million, consuming 180 billion gallons of fuel and driving 3.6 trillion miles a year. Okay, the numbers get big pretty fast. Okay, those are my assumptions. So here is the S curve in my model for ICE versus EV market share. So starting now at about 8-9% or so, and then going up, capping at that 90% by 2036. Okay.
Uh-huh. And that's a fairly slow ramp compared to many folks. I think it's going to be faster than that, but that's pretty fast. And but I would call it conservative.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be faster, it could be slower. I've tried to pick something that's kind of middle of the road.
Yep.
And then here's how it looks in terms of actual number of vehicles. So the blue is the ICE, and you can see the decline. ICE is actually already in decline. It's been in decline now for a few years.
Right.
And EVs on the rise. Okay, so you can see I've got ICE sales here out to perpetuity, and I've got the EV sales growing over time.
Right.
Okay. Now this is what it looks like with autonomy. We don't need as many vehicles with autonomy. Each vehicle is utilized more. Therefore, the number of EVs potentially sold in the future is a lot less. Okay, I think this is very conservative. But just for this purpose, in terms of modeling out gas station decline, I went with a very conservative model with autonomy.
Yeah, there is another another branch just for future potential versions of this. There is a bunch of folks who feel that if the cost of travel drops to truly 50 cents a mile, it might result in a lot more travel.
And I agree with that. I think that is very likely to be the case.
Right.
So yes, there's probably a model with autonomy where the number of vehicles is similar to the model without autonomy.
Right.
Yeah. If the cost declines a lot, you get people using a lot more of it. They would make a lot more trips. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yep. Okay, so this is then the vehicle fleet over time. So growing to north of 250 million vehicles. And this is what it looks like with autonomy capping off at around 100 million.
Right.
So two fairly different models,
Right. Right.
right, in terms of the number of electric vehicles that are ultimately out there. Okay. And then on the flip side, the decline in the number of ICE vehicles. So it seems to me that this decline has already begun
Mhm.
and will just continue over time. It won't be as necessarily as smooth as this. It might be some lumps along the way, but directionally, this is where it's headed.
Right.
Okay. And then with autonomy, it falls off a cliff. Right. So it doesn't take much imagination then to, well, this is sort of the two overlaid on
Right.
top of each other. This is without autonomy, with the S curve in there, and then this is with autonomy. The two previous charts on top of each other.
Right.
Okay. Um, this is so the composition of the entire fleet. So you can see that as a percentage of the entire fleet, EVs grow in proportion to the ICE vehicles over time. So similar chart. And then this is with autonomy. Okay. All right. Let's move now to the number of miles driven. So obviously, as EVs become a larger portion of the fleet, then the total miles driven by EVs also grows over time. So in the world with no autonomy, it's about 3 trillion miles a year. Okay. And then when we factor in autonomy, we get to about 5 trillion. So already the model does assume some extra travel, extra mileage, a couple of trillion more miles a year.
Mhm.
But I think to your point, it could be a whole lot more than this. Yeah. All right. And then conversely, what happens to the miles driven by ICE vehicles? This is without autonomy. It drops from 3.5 trillion down, below 500 billion
Mhm. Mhm.
by 2050. And then with autonomy, it drops even faster.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. The amount of fuel used. If you're driving less, then the amount of fuel used by ICE vehicles also falls. This is compounded by the fact that these cars are getting more fuel efficient over time. So the decline actually in the amount of fuel used is greater than just the decline in miles.
Mhm.
This is the chart for a situation where there's not autonomy. And this is the chart for autonomy.
Wow.
So we're looking at a pretty rapid decline in fuel used by ICE vehicles. So if today we're at, 160 billion gallons, it's by 2032, we get to half of that level.
Right. That's pretty funny because that is exactly where my eye was searching for. Where is the halfway point? That's,
Yeah. Now, long before you get to that point, you have a massive problem with service stations. We'll discuss that in just a second. So this is the number of service stations needed. Now, my definition of needed is very different than an economic definition about whether service stations can survive. I'm assuming that each service station sells 1.2 million gallons a year. So how many do we need if that assumption stayed in place? Now, it's a terrible assumption because in reality, some gas stations will not survive if they only sell 1 million gallons
yeah.
a year.
Yeah.
Right? The decline in foot traffic into the service station is going to kill them long before they lose half of their gasoline sales. But just for the sake of, just being consistent across the model, this is showing how the decline in the number of gas stations if they all sell 1.2 million gallons, okay, which they clearly don't. But again, the halfway point here From 145,000 down to, let's say 75,000, that's probably about 2034.
Hmm.
This is in the no autonomy scenario.
Okay,
Okay, so 10 years.
right.
We don't need, we only need half the number of gas stations. That's how many we would need. Okay. In the autonomy scenario, that's much earlier, between 2031 and 2032. You only need about half as many gas stations.
And this is not uh, terribly difficult to imagine. In your and my lifetime, we had situations where there were gas stations on literally every corner in a four-way stop. And now they are not even close to that. So we've seen this decline in the number of gas stations as the stations became more efficient, could fill faster, had more pumps, but also as the cars became, as you pointed out, much more efficient. So we've already seen this decline, and this would just be maybe a more rapid continuation.
Yeah, and what we're going to have here is the opposite that we're seeing today with Tesla and the supercharging network.
Right.
So gas stations don't make much money on selling fuel. It's a source of customer traffic. That's where they make their money on the convenience side of things. Other services that they sell besides gasoline. They make very, very little money on gasoline. Okay. It's the government that makes most money on gasoline.
Right.
We'll get to that in a
Right.
second. So the economics of a gas station is going to change dramatically when they get to 10, 20% decline in fuel. And that happens pretty quickly. Okay. So what's going to happen is many gas stations are going to find that they're not economical and they're going to shut down. And so people then that are used to having a gas station around the corner are suddenly going to discover it's not there anymore. So they're going to have to go further to fill up their car. It's going to become less convenient. They don't have the option of filling it up at home like EVs do.
Right.
Right. And once people convert to an EV, they don't typically need to go to a charging station around the corner because it's in their house. And as superchargers become more convenient, and there's more of them, it's going to cause a further shift to EVs, particularly again because people are going to find gassing up their vehicle less and less convenient over time.
Right.
Already, I understand in Manhattan, because of property taxes and just the cost of running a gas station there's only about 30 some gas stations in all of Manhattan.
Wow.
Terribly inconvenient if you have a car in Manhattan to fill it up.
Right.
Right? You got to fight traffic to go put gas in your car, fight traffic to get back home again. Like it doesn't make any sense in that kind of dense urban environment where you could just charge it in the building that you live in.
Right.
So there's going to be a very interesting dynamic going on with gas stations. From an economic perspective, it looks even worse than this chart shows. Okay. Now, what I wanted to do here, just for those that think that EVs won't reach 90% adoption, let's say it's only 60% adoption,
Okay.
whatever reason. Okay. This is still the decline of gas stations over time. And again, this is not considering economics. It's just the number of gas stations needed. It's still a severe and massive decline that'll completely disrupt the gas station industry.
Yeah.
So even if you're in the camp that says, EVs are just not going to be as successful as a lot of us think they will be, gas stations are in for a rude awakening here and some painful years ahead. Okay. So we already have an example of what's ahead. Again, Norway. Circle K owns a lot of gas stations in Norway, and they have been forced to adjust to this new environment where it's mainly EVs. So what have they done? So they have actually developed their own fast charging network, right? And they have built chargers at their gas stations and along Norwegian roads. And they have, stations all over the country. They also have created home charging services. So they have been early to this game in Norway, and they've positioned themselves quite nicely. As far as the stores go, they have sort of changed the store to become sort of cleaning stations. When people recharge their car, they now have time to get out and clean it.
Ah.
they discovered that in Norway, potentially with a lot of ice and snow, you might need your car cleaned more frequently. And so they've repurposed their gas stations to become EV sort of centers in that regard.
Huh.
So there is a role to play potentially for forward-thinking gas stations. Now, there is a guy here in the United States, in Maryland, that converted his gas station, and it cost him about $768,000 to do it, from gas to EV charging.
Right.
So I would imagine that a lot of gas station owners are not going to be excited about spending that kind of money to convert their gas station to EV charging and then still run the risk of whether it's going to work. So I think one pretty safe prediction is that there's going to be a boom in the removal of gasoline storage tanks. That will be a great business to be in at some point. So there's opportunities wherever you look.
Right.
Right. There also may be an interesting real estate play. These gas stations typically sit on some pretty nice locations. In many cases, corner lots. There'll be an opportunity to repurpose those lots for for something else. Okay.
Yeah, it would seem like there would be the opportunity would be, as someone who's been in the business of helping small businesses become successful most of my career, it would seem like a better move for these Circle Ks or for independent gas stations or small chains of gas stations would be to make that move to EV charging slower. So you would take out one rack of your gasoline pumps and replace it with a rack of EV chargers. And you would hopefully be able to buy it from Tesla, which charges anywhere from 1/3 to 1/10 as much as some of these other companies do for the chargers. That I would think that would be at least one way that some of these folks might survive.
Potentially, the challenge you have though is if you have to pull the tanks out, then you're digging a huge hole in the property, and that's not going to be conducive to having people charging their cars at the same time. So to me, it's kind of you bite the bullet and you convert.
Yeah.
If you're going to do it, because it's a big change.
Yeah.
And the way that gas stations are set up may not be optimal for charging vehicles.
Yeah.
Right. A Tesla supercharger doesn't look like a gas station lot. It's set up very differently. So I don't know. It remains to be seen. I'm sure we're going to see some very creative attempts at doing that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the other big disruption that I haven't really seen anybody talk about is the taxes that the government collects on fuel. So if we are right about EVs becoming widely adopted, then this source of income, which in 2022, I believe was about $90 billion.
Wow.
For the government, for the federal government and states. Now, just as a way of background, the U.S. Collects about 18.4 cents a gallon on gasoline and 24.4 cents on diesel.
Okay.
And then the states collect, a similar tax, although you can see it varies widely.
Right.
In California and Pennsylvania, it's up in the 60, 70 cent range. And in Alaska, it's about 9 cents a gallon. So this is a pretty significant source of revenue for the federal and the state governments, and it goes to maintaining roads and so on. So this is a pretty important, revenue stream. So what's going to happen to this as EVs take over the landscape? Well, I modeled that out too as part of my fumes model. So you can see that this is with no autonomy, that the two blue sections by 2050 become a pretty small amount. And so in order to hold it whole to that $90 billion level, the green represents how much EVs would have to kick in for the difference.
Right.
Okay. So I've calculated that by 2050, the tax on EV would need to be about $250 to $275 per year per EV to make up the difference. Okay, so if you're an EV owner, expect a new tax at some point.
Well, they already have this. I forget in how many states. I want to say it's on the order of 1/3 of the states have already put in additional registration fees. They're doing it
Yes.
at the time you register the vehicle and then re-register it each year. In some cases, it's fairly substantial.
Yep. So yeah, for a lot of people, it's nothing new, and for some people, this will be. But yes, this, if it's not already in your state, it's likely coming. And in the case of autonomy,
Wow.
it's even more severe. And because in my model I've got fewer vehicles, the cost per vehicle for this scenario is about $800 to $1,000 a year per EV.
Wow.
Now, you know, there's different ways of doing this, but that's kind of the ballpark range in terms of how much this tax would need to be in order to keep things whole.
Right. And it would seem like with regard to those who are using them as a revenue source, it would be fairly easy to charge by the mile since the individual is obviously keeping track of the mileage. Even the company that's supporting their enterprise by getting them rides has a way of keeping track of the miles, et cetera. So it would seem like charging by the mile would be a fairly simple way to do this.
That's right. Yeah, lots of different ways of doing it for sure. So it looks pretty bleak for gas stations, in my opinion. Now, like a lot of things that are exponential, maybe in the next few years it's not so severe. But eventually, I think you'll start to notice that your corner gas station around the corner may disappear.
And this is not, again, it's not unusual. We've seen this in the gas station business. I'm famously known as the bicycle guy. I've been in the bicycle industry my whole life, and the number of bicycle shops in the United States has halved over the last 30 years. So industries go through these kinds of things, and it really isn't something where you go, oh my gosh, overnight, it's a big difference. Although I think the one example that it was overnight would have been Radio Shack. So you went from being able to get your radio bits and parts nearby to not being able to, like, overnight. But in most cases, these things take. In the case you're showing, it'll be a slow decline, and it won't be very noticeable until at some point the person driving that ICE car, who just has to have that rumble, who just loves to have that kind of feeling, will be like, where is the gas station now? It's just not around, just not anywhere nearby, not convenient.
That's right. And you were sharing with me before we started that, in earlier days, you used to buy gasoline on the bottle.
You bought it, you went to the grocery store and you bought a
Yep.
5-gallon bottle of some kind. That would have been pre-plastics. So I guess it would have had to have been a glass bottle or a ceramic bottle. I'm not sure how that part of it worked, but yeah, you bought 5 gallons at a time and fueled up your car. There were no gas stations, no pumps.
And wouldn't it be ironic if we go back to that point where you had maybe EV trucks delivering bottles of gasoline to those that still need it?
Right. Entirely possible. And, as you
Yeah.
pointed out, there could be specific use cases which are just not inclined to going to an EV solution. There could be just people that want to because they enjoy it. It's a hobby. I'm only a couple of miles away from a place called Norco, California, where it is a horse city. And they just, almost everybody in that town, well, a huge percentage of that population has horse property and has horses because they like to ride. So there'll be people that I think will want to have the rumble or the engine. They're just into it. It's a hobby. And yeah, there'll have to be some way for them to get their gasoline.
Yeah, and I think that's great, and that makes a lot of sense. But as a form of transportation, it will not remain economical to do so.
Right, exactly.
And
But
that trend is clear. That ship has sailed.
that ship has sailed is right, so to speak.
Hmm.
I was just noticing the other day, in fact, a whole other industry, the motorboat industry, they are, I think, going to rapidly shift to electric. The implications for small motorcraft are at least as great, if not greater, than for vehicles. And it's quite easy, apparently, to electrify small motorcraft, watercraft. So that it'd be really quick, potentially, to see that industry go. Those folks who provide gasoline at recreational lakes and whatnot go away. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we'll see it with even larger boats as well. There's already some large ferries, I think, in Norway or some places in Europe that
Yes.
are full electric. So that's coming
And a
as well.
container ship, an entire container ship that is
Yeah,
now autonomous as
yeah,
well as electric. Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah. Very
Yeah.
interesting.
So the combination of autonomy and electric are going to be the killer for gas stations worldwide.
Indeed. Well, Cern, when you told me about this, I was really excited to be able to be the co-host of your presentation, because again, I think let me know in the comments below, is this something you were wondering? How soon will this impact? And in fact, there's another slide maybe you want to come up with, Cern, which would be what happens to the international cost of oil, or what does what is the total number of barrels per day that drops just as a result of what you've just done, because that'll ultimately impact you know lots of folks in Texas and other places that are going to see they're going to be stopping producing.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers for that, but certainly it's not hard to imagine the impact. The highest cost producers will get
Right.
shut out of the market the quickest. It won't make any sense for them to continue to produce. So wherever those high cost producers are, you can imagine the Middle East countries still the lowest cost producers. So to the extent that we're still using oil for plastics and chemicals and fertilizers and all kinds of stuff, which we will be,
Yes.
there'll still be demand for it, but the industry will be a lot smaller. And hopefully we won't need to go to wars to protect it,
Yes.
but
That we
changes the geopolitical situation quite significantly.
it could really impact it. And of course, one of the other things people have talked about, and it's kind of off subject, but it's kind of an extension of the same idea, is that as the cost of electricity goes to near zero, the cost to create pure water out of salt water will become very inexpensive. And at the point that that happens, all of a sudden you have the other big cause of war. The biggest civil war in the United States wasn't the one that we all hear about. It was between the state of California and the other neighboring states. It was the largest Supreme Court case in history, as they fought it out over the Colorado River water. And it takes up shelves and shelves and shelves of books that were created in order to fight that battle. Anyway, that's another story, but it is a real major change in the future in terms of water allocation, where everybody on the planet should have access to clean water.
That's right, and it may also placate the folks in Germany that are against Tesla expanding their factory there. There's plenty of water for everybody, and there won't be.
Plenty of water for everybody. All
Hey,
right, Cern. Again, thank you so much for sharing with us today, and I'd love to hear your comments below about what Cern has provided, and we'll look forward to Cern going down rabbit holes that most of us just don't seem to want to go down. Thanks again, Cern.
thank you, Randy.
And to all of you, it's been great talking to you.